They said, one, don't be evil. And then
Right.
two was like, organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I believe in. And so, then in 2016, everything changed. Google did not like the election of Donald Trump. And as soon as he was elected, the company did a complete 180. And it started with the executive team changing the message about free expression and saying, oh my gosh, we got to do something about all the fake news.
I just don't think that a private company should have the power that they have, the surveillance power, the censorship power, and the manipulation power. I think that's unacceptable for humanity, not just for Americans. That should be considered unacceptable for humanity.
According to Google whistleblower Zachary Vorhies, how is Google suppressing certain viewpoints, promoting others, and altering public perception? Is there evidence of active intent on the part of Google's staff or executives? And in the eyes of Dr. Robert Epstein, what are the broader implications of Google bias, whether intentional or unintentional, for America and beyond? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jekielek. In this special episode, we sit down with Google whistleblower Zachary Vorhies, a former senior Google engineer, who recently leaked nearly 1,000 pages of documents that he says suggest Google has been secretly acting as publisher, selectively boosting or demoting content, while publicly claiming to be a neutral platform. We sent some questions regarding each specific allegation that Voorhees made in our interview to Google. Google has not responded to our request for comments at this time. Due to the seriousness of the allegations, we also spoke to another Google whistleblower, Greg Coppola, who has also called out big tech bias, and Dr. Robert Epstein, a leading expert on Google search engine bias, to get their take on the leaked documents and Voorhees' allegations against Google. So before 2016, before the election, not a peep about quote-unquote fake news?
No, and in fact, I recall a slide deck that Google did for outreach, and they're talking about we're here to maximize user expression. We're a place where anyone can be themselves, right? Like the service is literally called YouTube, not our tube, right? And so as late as 2016, they were fully on board with Google's mission statement. And then after the election of Trump, they started to change. And I thought that was so weird, right? Because Google should be about making money for its shareholders. Why do they care? Why do they have a dog in the fight? I can understand the employees are of a political spectrum, and that they tend to lean left, and I get that, but there was something from the executive class after Trump won that was really biased, and that bias kept on amplifying and escalating, and things just started to get really weird.
That's very, very interesting. And so how did you, can you give me some ideas of how this manifested in those early days after 2016?
Yeah.
Slide decks changed, I don't know.
So a series of papers started to appear on the internal public corporate network, and they started referring to the psychological effects of algorithmic discrimination. And it was a paper, it was 60 pages. It was part of the disclosure that I did, and it talked about the psychological responses of crowding and discrimination, and then cited studies that alleviated the sense that someone was being censored. So you ever go into an elevator and you push that button to close the door, and you think to yourself, is that button actually doing anything? Because you're hitting it, and then finally the door closes, but it looks like it closed when it would have closed anyways if you hadn't hit the button. Well, it turns out that if this paper talked about that if users just had an elevator button that they could hit that makes it think that they're getting less censored or less discriminated against, then that would relieve the psychological pain of being discriminated. And I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, why do they care so much about algorithmic discrimination and its psychological effects? And then what happened is that we started getting design documents talking about the danger of fake news.
Okay.
And in Google, the CEO of YouTube, Susan Wachowski, said, in multiple public weekly meetings that we had, where the company comes together and then she talks about what's going on with the company. She's like, the fake news is a problem. It was a factor in, the last presidential election. We're going to try to boost authoritative content and, prevent brand unsafe fake news from, reaching our users. And so that's when I noticed something. I was like, well, wait a minute, what's the definition of fake news? Like, who's deciding this? And so I dug and I dug and I dug, and what I found out was the examples that they were using for fake news were things that were actually happening in America and were actually news events that happened in the past. And one of them was, involving Hillary Clinton and weapons going through Benghazi to ISIS, and they were saying, oh, this is fake news. And so they were trying to set up this pattern of examples of fake news and then how to use that to censor the internet. And so the way that they were censoring the internet is that they had these like blacklists that they were kind of like secret, and Google wasn't telling people about these blacklists, but they existed. But what they started to do is they started to create a systematized AI that would censor large portions of the internet using blacklists generated by staff. So I just made a post on Medium in which I exposed how Jordan B. Peterson was knocked offline and censored. And I wrote the letter to Tulsi Gabbard's attorney that's now suing Google and saying, hey, there's this exploit you should know about that Google is leaving open for third-party insiders to be able to use to take people offline. And what Google reports is that it's suspicious activity. They're like, oh, it's suspicious activity, but they don't let the person affected by the deactivation to know what that suspicious activity was.
So to explain this exploit, sort of, let's say I want to hit someone. Well, how does this exploit work?
Okay, so let's say you want to hit someone. What you do is you get their email address, at gmail.com. And then, so you've got this target's email address. You take that email address and you flip one letter and you change it. Okay, and then you create an account with that new email address. And you just repeat this pattern over and over and over again until you have a network of spoofed accounts.
Okay.
Those spoofed accounts then start pushing spam email to other systems. And now if they're generating enough spam email, the AI will come through and it will say, this is a botnet collection, and it will deactivate all the accounts.
Including?
But surprisingly, it also takes down the original account.
I see.
And so that original account could be made, let's say it's been in the system for a decade, before the person became an influencer, and then the person becomes an influencer, and then and then all these spam accounts get created. Well, the timestamps on the original account and the spam accounts are so completely different that it's obvious that these spam accounts were created later.
Right.
And so, this is an easy bug to fix, right? Like you just retune the AI so it takes down the botnet and doesn't take down the target's email address. But as far as I know, that's never been fixed. I've never seen it fixed. I've seen other people taken down by this. And so I suspect that this is what was happening to Tulsi Gabbard because right after the first Democratic debates, Tulsi was the #1 search candidate, and coincidentally, her ad account got deactivated for 6 hours, and she missed the entire surge in that, right? And I ended up talking to her attorney, and he was saying that, Google wasn't really telling us what was happening. They just said that, that there was suspicious activity with our account. So I kind of pattern matched that, and I made this Medium article saying this is the pattern, this is the exploit, and I'm trying to notify the public that it's not just Google that's censoring. They've got this complicated system of plausible deniability.
Wow. And how does this connect with the elections, with the original question? That's interesting.
Right. Well, the elections are all about, whether someone has free and open access and equal access to the channels of information distribution. So if Tulsi Gabbard's being knocked offline, and other politicians are being knocked offline, then that's de facto election interference. And it's being done by these entities that aren't registering as lobbyists. And so we've got these tech monopolies that are acting as unregistered lobbyists that are making decisions and giving, insiders information on how to take down targets. And that's essentially what's happening, is that Google is allowing democracy to be hacked.
So do you have any specific evidence to suggest that people at Google are actually facilitating these kind of, what you call a plausible deniability scenario, like with this scenario you described?
Yeah, so included in my disclosure that I've disclosed through Project Veritas, your audience can go there and see and download the everything.zip file, and what they're going to find is they're going to find blacklists that exist. Okay, and these blacklists have been uploaded through this system called Buganizer, and there are embedded in that, there's reasons and reasons that these things have appeared in these blacklists. So in the case of Jordan B. Peterson, it was actually a targeted attack. In the case of
in the case of Jordan B. Peterson, he's on the blacklist, or
no, he was on. He was not on the blacklist.
Right.
So, the blacklists are an example, another example. And
Okay.
the thing is that these blacklists are also being generated by trusted third parties. So the ADL, the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center,
Okay.
was giving recommendations on what to blacklist. And so those were coming in, then people were just implementing it. Like the operators of the company were just implementing these third party blacklists. And so what's been really popular today is that people are going through the Google Now blacklist, which includes all the sites that were filtered from their Google Now news app.
Right.
And it's astounding. People are like, well, why did they censor natural news? They've got a huge staff. They're a legitimate, credible, reputable source of news for a lot of people. And Google is, time and again making these decisions. And the thing is if they ever got discovered, they're going to say, well, we were just implementing the recommendation of our third-party partners.
I see.
And they've been denying that they've been doing that. People have been asking and trying to investigate, and Google's been putting up a wall. Well, I've made that wall transparent, and I'm releasing the information so that people can see how the system operates, how people are being suppressed, how democracy is being hacked.
There have been attempts, notably in the Daily Beast, to portray Zachary Vorhies as a conspiracy theorist with unorthodox views, ostensibly to discredit his revelations. Voorhees has offered us this statement in response. He doesn't address specific claims, but here's what he said. Any claim that someone has fringe beliefs or theories should be checked against trends.google.com and see what the views of the rest of America are and what they search for. I have sacrificed everything to bring the truth to the American population about an existential threat to national security. Attempts by bad actors with a history of pushing fraudulent conspiracy theories to the American public should reflect instead on the fact that they live in a free society that allows them to do this. To dig a bit deeper, we reached out to Dr. Robert Epstein, senior research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology, and leading authority on Google search engine bias, to get his take on Zachary Vorhies and the documents he revealed.
2016, I published a long investigative article for U.S. News and World Report that was called The New Censorship. And I talked in detail about 9 of Google's blacklists and exactly how Google uses them. I had never seen one, but I knew that they existed. I know this because I've been a programmer my whole life, so I know how things work. The point is, in January of 2019, we had a leak that referred to one of the Google blacklists. That was something.
Right.
But what Voorhees has done is he's actually uh, found blacklists, and he's released them. One of them was the blacklist referred to in a January leak, but there was no list. Now we actually have lists, and those lists seem to show political partisanship. That's not my main concern. My main concern is that that a company like Google can decide what billions of people see or don't see, and blacklisting is, of course, part of the don't see, element. But there are other documents which I think most people would kind of skip over that really, really caught my eye
Okay.
because I knew about the blacklisting. That to me, as a programmer, that's obvious. But when Google has said over and over again, and usually in response to some research I've done, when Google says over and over again, we don't re-rank search results for political purposes. And they've said that over and over. It's very easy to find that line.
Right.
We don't re-rank. That's what they say. I kind of thought, well, maybe they don't re-rank because it would be tough to do that. Any expert on search engines will tell you that the algorithm is very complicated that does the ranking. Now they do adjust the algorithm. They admit to adjusting it 600 times a year,
Right.
but pinpoint re-ranking, that would be tough. Blacklists, that's easy. That just means you check and see if that particular item or web page is on a blacklist. If so, you don't show it, or you can move it lower in the list, or you can eliminate it from the list. The point is, blacklisting is easy. Re-ranking, that's tough. So it turns out that in these documents, there are multiple pieces of paper in there, multiple files showing that Google not only re-ranks, but they de-rank and they fringe rank. I never even heard of fringe ranking.
Right.
Uh, and they even have a specialized software system, which they call the Twiddler system, that makes it easy for them to do re-ranking. Now that's just genius. That is absolute genius to literally have software that overlays the search algorithm. It makes it easy for them to do pinpoint re-ranking. And in this treasure trove of documents, there's actually a manual for the Twiddler system.
Wow. I had a similar thought looking at that particular document. So you're basically saying this is something that went beyond your imagination around what Google could do, which frankly is considerable. I've read a number of your pieces.
Well, yes. In fact, when I first started to tweet about this leak, the first four words I typed were "I told you so,"
Okay.
because I have been warning people for years about Google's uh, power in manipulating opinions and thinking and votes and attitudes and so on. I've been warning people about the power that they have. Now the leaks are of course are not only confirming that they have this power, but are showing us more and more that they wield this power systematically and deliberately within the company. That they openly talk about shifting people's thinking. Of course, one of the leaks that came out about a year and a half ago was a video called The Selfish Ledger, in which people at Google were speculating about re engineering humankind, literally
Right.
re engineering human behavior worldwide. But well, this latest leak shows not only the power that Google has, which of course I've proved in experiments now for years, but it shows that they actually have systems within the company that allow them to wield this power that they have to shift opinions and votes and purchases and so on. So we're seeing real systems. The systems have names. We're seeing real communications among people working at Google about the power that they have. We're seeing discussions there about how to wield that power. And of course, a video from the CEO of YouTube talking very specifically about using algorithms to push up certain news stories and push down other news stories. This is serious stuff. This is about human autonomy. free speech, censorship. This is about the free and fair election, the integrity of our electoral process. These are very serious issues. I think it's a little crazy and very brave for people now to be, leaking material from Google, for people to be quitting Google and coming forward and talking to the public. Uh, my sense is that these two individuals, Zach Vorhies and Greg Coppola, are credible people. They're credible people in the sense that they're senior software engineers at Google. At Google, that means something. That doesn't mean much at every company, but at Google, that does mean something.
Right.
Voorhees was there for 8 years. Coppola technically is still there, has been there for 5 years. Coppola has a PhD from one of the top computer science programs in the world at the University of Edinburgh. These are credible people coming forward. Again, they're somewhat crazy and very brave. I think that's the best way to put it. And I think we need to pay close attention to these leaks. Of course, the troubling thing is that mainstream media is pretty much ignoring the leaks and even the documents.
Very troubling. In fact, looking up Voorhees, if you look up Zachary Vorhies in Google, one of the top hits is a Daily Beast piece that basically focuses entirely on, it seems like a kind of character assassination piece, talking about some of Voorhees, some more controversial or fringe ideas, but ignores the substance of his allegation. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yes, I read that article in Daily Beast. Of course, it's just pure character assassination. It doesn't really address the substantive issues that Voorhees has raised. But there was also something technically troubling about that article, because it's common practice now in journalism that when you quote a tweet, you then show a screenshot. And if you look carefully at that piece, I think there is one screenshot in there somewhere, but basically it quotes many tweets without showing screenshots. Now, why is that? That just doesn't make sense. It almost suggests to me that that information was supplied to the Daily Beast by Google, because Google would be scraping content from Twitter but would not be preserving screenshots. And I
Oh,
think that's a good
fascinating.
possibility. Yeah, of course. Well, we know they scrape the content from Google, but they would have no access. Uh, they wouldn't be able to generate screenshots unless the material was current. And I checked on Voorhees' Twitter feed, and if those tweets were ever there, they're not there now. So at some point or other, he must have decided, well, I'm embarrassed by some of the things I tweeted. I think
Right.
everyone is, including me. And again, there was an obvious lack of screenshots in that Daily Beast article.
In addition to speaking with Dr. Robert Epstein, we also talked to the other recent Google whistleblower, Greg Coppola. Prior to the Voorhees leak, Greg Coppola spoke to Project Veritas about Google's political bias on July 24th of this year. Coppola was placed on administrative leave less than 24 hours afterwards. We asked Coppola for his assessment of the leaked documents and about the controversial Google initiative, Machine Learning Fairness.
I think as an engineer, he's very credible. I think the documents he released are authentic.
What makes you sure that these documents are the real deal?
Well, I suppose a few things. One is that I'd seen a few of them. Other ones are in the same style that I would recognize. And finally, it really lines up with sort of what I predicted just as being an engineer. In my original interviews, I was just sort of saying that I knew the toolbox and therefore knew how the algorithm must be working. And some of the leaks that I hadn't seen before actually just confirm that, especially this notion of there being trusted sources, which are determined by relationships and sort of by hand or by human choice.
And the other thing that kind of struck me was this area of machine learning fairness. And I'm wondering, as a kind of someone who specializes in AI, if you could kind of break this down for me, how does this work?
Yeah, machine learning fairness is another issue where it's like it might be good, it might be bad, but we should be transparent about it because it is a very like biased way to look at things. So machine learned fairness would be like an example of that would be like in America, there's more male CEOs than female CEOs. I'm not sure what the ratio really is, but let's say it's 98% are men and 2% are women. So then if you type in CEOs in Google, I'm not sure if it still does this, but for a while, half of them would be women. And the idea is that if you just go by the raw data, it would be unfair because it would be suggesting that CEOs are mostly men. So then in order to encourage young girls to want to be CEOs, then they would make it so that the pictures come out 50-50, and then that would be more quote unquote fair. So, you might agree with that, you might not agree with that, but I think it's just important to be transparent that that there's an attempt to not reflect reality. There's an attempt to sort of correct reality, because when you say you're correcting reality, that's introducing a bias right there that you know better than the way it is, which you might or you might not.
And on the other hand, I saw this machine learning fairness. It had like all of this supporting documentation, all of this mobilization of people. And then it also had like this history, it actually was birthed in Stanford. And so there was like this slow burn of a design, and then it got adopted, right? Okay. And so I saw this entire history of like from academic all the way into the corporate infrastructure and being implemented with machine learning fairness. And nobody knew about machine learning fairness. It wasn't being talked about. And so, Google's positioning this AI weapon right in the minds of every American, and it needed to be disclosed, and that's what I'm disclosing. And one of the most insidious applications of this was how they were changing the autocomplete on Google search. So imagine that you're going to Google search and you start typing in words, then Google's like suggesting these sentences in a drop-down box, okay? So what became really creepy is when you started searching for these culture war terms like men can, there seems to be this war against men. And so, Google like swapped out all the real words, all the real phrases, and boosted these phrases such as men can have babies, men can have periods. And I'm like, wait a minute, is this real? And what Google was telling everyone is that these auto-suggestions were coming from the crowd. Like, people are really searching for this, and this is what other people are searching for. And they're projecting a false consensus. And it's really creepy because, I've got a background in psychology, and at certain points, people are suggestible, right? So if they turn on a news channel, they're skeptic, right? But if someone can give a presumption of something, and the person has to think it's true in order to progress, then it kind of like slips past their filters. So when they're doing an autocomplete, they're getting these suggestions like, men can have babies, men can have periods, right? And, people think that, well, that's what everybody else thinks. And it just sort of slips in as something that's true. And so these people searching for information are being cut off from true information. And if people are searching for information related to elections, then that means that there's election interference.
Well, so this is some of Dr. Robert Epstein's research that you were, alluding to a little bit earlier, where the completion functions actually impact, people's decision making and so forth. It's very, very interesting.
Robert Epstein is really he's nailed it, right? And it's the autocomplete, like the search suggestion for autocomplete is where most of the election hacking is taking place right now. For the independent voters that are trying to get information at the last second, like it's that autocomplete hacking is just really insidious. People want to follow what the consensus is. There's like a really interesting experiment called the Ash experiment, where there was one person that was the target, and then he came into a classroom where the experiment was about to take place, and he thought that all the other cohorts were also other volunteers. But it turns out that they were all actors. Okay. And so this guy would go on a chalkboard and he would like draw like a line, and he'd draw like a larger line. He's like, which line is longer? Every one of the actors would give the wrong like answer. What did the test subject do? The test subject also gave the wrong answer.
I see.
But he only gives the wrong answer if every single actor gives the same wrong answer.
Fascinating.
What they found was that this consensus could be cracked if one of the other actors gave the real answer. And so the only way that this consensus hacking works is if they can hide all the information that is countering their narrative.
This phrase, algorithmic unfairness, which comes from actually an academic article which Google sponsored, and that was one of the documents in the Voorhees leak.
Right.
That's a very general concept which could be interpreted to mean that Google is going to be a kind of buffer between all knowledge and real people. And in doing that buffering, it's going to correct for algorithmic unfairness and basically give us the real message. And that's extremely, extremely dangerous. And of course, Zach Vorhies pointed this out.
Right.
The issue of trying to suppress fake news, that's part of a much larger problem, and that is the censorship problem. And that means, again, a big tech company having the means to decide what more than 2 billion people around the world will see or will not see, period. It's not just about quote unquote fake news, which is impossible to define. It's a much larger issue because you know what? You don't know what you don't know. That's the problem. So that when you suppress content, that's quite serious. People don't have access to that material. They don't have access to that kind of thinking, period. I mean, that's quite serious. Then, of course, we have the surveillance problem. And because a lot of what Google is able to do to us and to do to elections is based on their massive surveillance program, none of the documents leaked recently really shed light on the extent of the surveillance. And as far as I can tell, Google is surveilling us aggressively over more than 200 different platforms, even through smart thermostats manufactured by Nest, a company that Google owns. It was revealed a few months ago that when Google bought Nest, they started putting microphones into the smart thermostats. So, we still need to know a lot more about the surveillance. And then the biggest issue of all is the manipulation. And, we get kind of glimpses of the possibilities of manipulation in recent leaks. But of course, my research has focused on under controlled conditions, determining what power Google and some other companies, but mainly Google, has to manipulate. And we still need to know a lot more about that. I suspect there are communications within that company, thousands, hundreds of thousands of communications that bear specifically on that issue, the issue of our ability to manipulate and how can we best do it.
Yeah, so there was a point that I kind of was like, okay, I've got to do something. This is my breaking point. And this breaking point was when I saw a design document for deleting words out of the Arabic to English translation dictionary to make Trump's tweets on Twitter sound crazy.
Break this down for me.
I caught Google deleting words out of their dictionary to make Trump tweets sound crazy. And so what this design document said, so this design document appeared, I think it was right after a New York Times article, June 1st, 2017. Okay. Trump had just gotten back from Saudi Arabia. And he made a tweet, and the tweet was, the news is really fake, kafefe. And the news, these establishment news players said, well, it doesn't mean anything. And then people did the research and they said, no, there's this translation. He was giving a coded signal to his Twitter followers. And so the New York Times came out with this piece where they're able to find some person that said that kafefe didn't make any sense. Okay, and so they made this article saying, no, actually, the people on the internet are wrong. Covfefe actually means absolutely nothing, and the Trump was just saying nonsense because he's crazy in the head, right? Well, Google took that New York Times article and they created a design document saying, well, Trump did this tweet. It erroneously translates into "we will stand up," but the New York Times has said that that's clearly nonsense. So let's replace that with an Easter egg, which was going to be a guy shrugging like this, which would have been really funny, but they never actually put in the shrug. It was kind of a deception to get the employees, to trick the employees to put it in there. So the employees got to work, and I've included with the in the disclosure not only the design doc of this, but also the implementation log of the employees going through there. And they removed the literal translation of covfefe from translating, but then they noticed that the AI is still translating it because it's like taking the sounds like that your mouth makes, and then it's converting it, called transliteration. It's converting it into a different form and then being able to make the translation. So if you could map like a network, it would be like, it's like you had two nodes and then like a fallback one, and the fallback was still in place. So they had to delete it twice, right? Which is really ironic. Like you would think that these people that are deleting it saying, hey, maybe this is actually Word and we're doing really bad things, but it never occurs to them, right? And so they go through, they delete it, it goes out there, and then the New York Times comes out with a subsequent article saying Trump was caught, tweeting nonsense. He's clearly insane. I think we need to use the 25th Amendment to remove him from the presidency. And I saw this and I was like, this is clown world. They're literally using magic to like manipulate the information landscape of our culture to remove a president that was elected by a democracy. Like, these people are out of control. And that's when I realized that this was more than bias. This was like a national security concern. And the fact that now they got caught deactivating Tulsi Gabbard's account shows, I hope, to a lot of people that, this isn't a left versus right issue. This is like everyone's affected. Everyone is being, except the players that Google wants, they're being boosted up, and everyone else is being deranked.
Oh, very, very interesting. Okay. Listen, so another thing kind of jumps to mind right now, okay? One thing, and perhaps you've already spoken to this indirectly, but one thing that's kind of stark in the treasure trove, so to speak, that you provide is that there aren't really any memos from higher ups specifically saying, here's what we're doing, here's our approach, or anything of this nature. Can you tell me about why you think that is?
I'm actually going to say that you're wrong, because what I've noticed is, as these documents have been given to the media and to the crowd, people have been data mining, and they've been looking at who has been writing and authoring these design documents. So I'll give you an example. If you go to the Covfefe design document to see who designed to remove the translation word, what you're going to find is that it's executives that are authoring these papers, and they can tell by the @, the username. And they don't put their name down, they put their username because it's kind of shorthand for signing a paper.
Sure.
And so I'm going to ask your audience to, if they're going through this, to go and look at the @ for who's authoring these papers, because that's going to tell you a lot about the network that's involved in subverting democracy.
Well, I saw that, but the problem there is that a higher up person who was in that thread, that conversation thread, actually killed the project. So that's not the smoking gun.
Right.
We really need to see what those communications are among people at the very top of the company. We need to know what policies they're putting in place. Again, think back to 2016 and 2015. Think back a little bit. Eric Schmidt, who at that time was head of Google, offered in writing to run Hillary Clinton's tech campaign. That we found in an email that leaked through WikiLeaks.
Right.
Uh, he also ended up setting up the Groundwork, which was a highly secretive tech company, the sole purpose of which was to put Hillary Clinton in office. That was funding from Eric Schmidt and Google. And it was a brilliant way of dodging federal election campaign laws because uh, if you set up a super PAC, yes, you can take all the money that you can possibly get. That's true. There's no limit, but you can't work directly with a campaign. If you work directly with a campaign, you can only donate so much. But if you set up a secretive company like the Groundwork, then you can finance the Groundwork to the hilt. I mean, as much as it needs, unlimited support, and you can work directly with the campaign. It was brilliant. Everything Google does is brilliant. People think I have something against Google. I have nothing against Google. I know people there. I know someone who's very near the top of Google, and we're talking about very smart people. A lot of whom are very well-meaning. There are some utopian thinkers there at the top of Google. I just don't think that a private company should have the power that they have, the surveillance power, the censorship power, and the manipulation power. I think that's unacceptable for humanity, not just for Americans. That should be considered unacceptable for humanity. We must not allow that kind of power to be so concentrated. In this case, concentrated in a company that is not accountable to the public, not to the American public, not to the French public, not to the German public. They're not accountable to any public anywhere.
So, your research has shown, and please, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that in the 2016 election, based on the search engine manipulation effect that you've described, you were able to see that Google shifted at least 2.5 million votes. You didn't say whether Google did it intentionally. It's simply the impact of how the search autocomplete and so forth was working, right? Or the ranking was working.
The minimum 2.6 million, my estimate of minimum 2.6 million votes, that's based on, in part on our election monitoring project from 2016, in which we preserved 13,207 searches, election-related searches, and 98,044 web pages to which the search results linked. And then we analyzed the searches and the web pages, and we found significant bias in favor of Hillary Clinton on the Google search engine, but not Bing or Yahoo. And the bias was quite substantial. We actually found significant bias toward Hillary Clinton, whom I supported, in all 10 search positions on the first page of search results. So that 2.6 million as a minimum, that's based on just on our findings regarding search results. But since that time, I have discovered and have been studying very, very carefully a number of other tools that Google and other companies have available to them to change opinions and thinking and behavior and votes. So I think that 2.6 million is a low estimate. I think Google is probably doing more than just showing people biased search results. Now, you mentioned intentionality, and that's an important point. I have never said that Google did this deliberately. It's possible it happened just because they're neglectful and they simply allow one candidate to be favored over another candidate in search results. They allow the algorithm just to do that kind of ordering, which is what it does for everything, after all.
Right.
It has no equal time rules built into it. It always favors one music service over another, or one dermatologist over another,
Right.
and one candidate over another. And of course, in my mind, that's even more diabolical than a Google executive sitting around saying, "Hey, let's manipulate an election." The idea that our elections, the outcomes of our elections might be determined by algorithms. That's that's
I
insane.
just got
And
a
don't
chill up my spine as you said that.
Well, sure, and think about it. It's not just the United States. Google is the primary search engine used by more than 90% of people in almost every country in the world. My wife and I lived in the Fiji Islands for a while. I had a professorship there, and more than 90% of search in the Fiji Islands is done on Google. If Google is just not paying close attention, and in every country in the world, almost every country in the world, they're simply allowing their algorithms to favor one candidate over another in elections. To me, that I mean, that's there aren't even words. There aren't even words to explain how disturbing that is. I would much rather have Google executives sitting around picking candidates than leave things up to algorithms. Not only that, I estimated back in 2015, uh, based on the power of search results to influence opinions and votes. That's number one, but also based on the win margins that we find in elections around the world. And by win margin, I mean, that difference
Right.
between the winner and the loser. Those win margins in national elections are often extremely small. And given the power of search rankings to shift opinions and votes, and given the pattern of win margins that we found in national elections around the world, I mean, I estimated that even back then, Google's search algorithm was determining the outcomes of upwards of 25% of the national elections in the world, with no one knowing that this was occurring, number one. And number two, without leaving a paper trail for authorities to trace, because search results are ephemeral experiences. I'm going to put that in quotes, ephemeral experiences.
Right.
They're very brief events. They're generated on the fly. They have an impact on the user, then they disappear, and they're gone forever. They're not stored anywhere, and you can't go back in time and reconstruct them. So, this power of ephemeral experiences, that's frightening to me, because that's what I've been studying in my experimental research, is the power that ephemeral experiences have to shift opinions and votes. And that phrase, ephemeral experiences, that turned up in a leak, not to Breitbart, not to Tucker Carlson, that turned up in a leak last year to the Wall Street Journal. That was in an email. That phrase, ephemeral experiences, was in an email written by a Google employee who said, how can we use ephemeral experiences to change people's opinions about, I think, Trump's immigration ban or something like that? But that phrase, how can we use ephemeral experiences? Wow, that caught my eye, because that means people at Google are well aware of the power that they have, and they're well aware of the special power that ephemeral experiences have to shift opinions and votes, because people basically can't see them. They can't see that kind of manipulation. In effect, this is a whole new category, a whole new class of subliminal manipulation.
It's just almost unbelievable to hear what you say. But as I said, I've been following your research quite closely, and I know this is very, very real. Dr. Epstein, based on this new information that you now have on your research, is there any evidence that any of this could be intentional from Google?
Intentionality, is still a tough issue. Uh, you don't find in the current leak, for example, you don't find someone saying, "We're going to make sure Trump is not reelected in 2020." Okay, I couldn't find anything like that in these
Yeah.
documents. I also couldn't find in this collection of documents any memos from top executives at the company, and that's the problem. What are the top executives discussing? What are they talking about? What, and for that matter, what missions are they establishing? For the company. What goals do they have in mind? There's nothing in the documents that tell us anything about that. So intentionality is tough. It's a very tough issue. All I can say is I used to be obsessed with the intentionality issue, And then eventually I realized it's not that important, because even if they're just not paying attention, the fact is that their search suggestions, their answer boxes, uh, their search results, and their news feeds, and so on and so forth, they all end up favoring one party over another, one candidate over another. You can make up all the reasons you want for why that's happening, but once it happens, it shifts opinions and votes, and you can easily end up with a kind of what I call a digital bandwagon effect. And
Right.
I actually published a computer model showing how a digital band effect would work over time. There's a little bit of favoritism in an algorithm, and that shifts some opinions and votes, and then that in turn increases the bias in the algorithm, which in turn shifts some more opinions and some more voting preferences, et cetera, et cetera. And so
Right.
you end up with this feedback effect, which over time can have a dramatic impact on the outcome of elections, or for that matter, on people's opinions on any issues. Now, we're talking about the undecided. We're not talking about people who are firmly committed to one position or another. But in real life, and especially in close elections, the undecided people, they're the ones who decide. In other words, they're the ones who determine how things go. And, Google, and to a lesser extent Facebook, they control extremely powerful mechanisms for shifting opinions and votes without people's knowledge, without leaving a paper trail, and they present, in my mind, a serious threat to democracy and to human autonomy.